Welcome to your Partner in Success Radio. I'm Denise Griffitts, and today I welcome Kyle Austin Young to the show. And we talk a lot on this show about building your business and going after big goals. But Kyle is coming at this from an angle I don't think we've ever explored before. He's not here to pump you up or tell you to believe in yourself harder. He's here to show you how to actually stack the odds of success in your favor. And honestly, I think that's something that every single one of us can use. Today's show is brought to you by Bradley Roush. Now, most founders rather, obsess over the funnel and ignore the first 72 hours after someone pays. But those first 72 hours in the program where churn, refunds, and weak referrals are born. Bradley works with founder-led coaching and consulting businesses to redesign those first 72 hours. That's important, 72 hours. That's where it fails or doesn't. And the systems that follow. So clients stay longer, refer more, and growth feels lighter instead of heavier. You can find him at Bradley Roush, RAUSCH.com. Now back to my guest. Kyle Austin Young is an award-winning strategy consultant, and he works with high achievers, entrepreneurs, and leaders across just about every industry you can think of. And over the years, he's developed a system, a real practical system for helping people accomplish the goals that actually mean something to them. And it all comes down to understanding your odds of success and knowing how to change them. And his insights have shown up, in some pretty impressive places. Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Forbes, CNBC, Psychology Today, the Boston Globe, and Business Insider. So he is not someone who just talks a good game. And this is important. He is also the author of Success is a Numbers Game, and I have that book sitting right here on my desk. And when he's not consulting, writing, or spending time with his family, you'll find him out fishing, which, if you think about it, might be the perfect hobby for someone who thinks a lot about patience, strategy, and playing the long game. Kyle, good morning and welcome, and thank you for sending me your book.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a terrific book. And I was telling you in the green room, the virtual green room, there's so many things. I was reading it, and I've read it a couple of times, 3 times actually. There's so many things here that I was like, well, that makes sense. Why haven't I thought about that?
Well, that was certainly the goal. I'm glad that it impacted you like that. And 3 times, you might be the Guinness World Record holder for the person who's read my book the most other than me. I had to read it more than 3 times in the process of writing it, but that's great. Thank you.
I always read these books when they land. I mean, to me, it's a gift when my guests send me their books, and I read them 2.5 to 3 times. 2.5 means when it lands, I do the page flip and stick sticky notes in it because I'm going to come back. And then when I know it's time for me to review it and really get into it, I read it again. And then the 3rd time, I read it the weekend before you come on. I'm back in there and I'm going, ooh, more stuff. It's very fat right now with sticky notes. I will not mark up a book, but sticky notes I do.
Very good.
So tell us about you. I would love to start at the very beginning of your story. And I guess my question, Kyle, is what sparked your interest in the odds of success? Because most people think about goals in terms of how badly they want it or how hard they're willing to work. But you came at it from a completely different angle.
I've been asked that question a lot, and I think looking back that I have a pretty good handle on it. I think it was actually something that was born out of kind of what appeared to be some misfortune early in my career. I had some very visible leadership positions that were high paying and lots of responsibility, lots of, admiration and respect that came out of those jobs. And I got laid off twice, back to back, within about a 13-month period. And in both cases, I was, at least in my opinion, and I think I have the performance reviews to demonstrate this, doing a really good job. It wasn't necessarily that I was being fired from these jobs, but I was losing these jobs. And the first time my wife and I, this was, well over a decade ago, we'd just bought our first home. The second time we were in the process of, adopting our daughter, which is pretty famously expensive. And so I had to go to my wife on multiple occasions and say very suddenly that I'd lost my income. And I think one of the things that I learned from that experience was that my ability to provide for my family wasn't just going to be based on my own performance. I could do a good job. I could show up, work hard with integrity, all of these things, but that wasn't necessarily going to be enough. Ultimately, I needed to turn at least some of my attention to the success of the organizations as a whole. Even if that was outside of my job description, I had to do what I could to make sure that the projects I was involved in succeeded, even if that meant, again, participating in ways that maybe no one was necessarily asking me to. So after those 2 layoffs, I decided to transition to consulting. I was very fortunate. After the second one, my work was known and respected, and I had 4 job offers the day after I lost that second position. I was trying to decide which one to take, and a couple of people were really generous with me. One took me to lunch, another called me on the phone, but they both gave the same advice, which was, we know you have these different offers to consider. Why don't you suggest that you take a fractional role with each of the 4 companies, and then you'll have some diversification in your income. You'll be able to certainly grow your income with, 4 salaries, and you'll put yourself in a position where you can then uh, breathe a little easier in terms of the fear of being laid off for a third time. And so I took that advice, but again, I took with me this mentality that what can I do to actually make these projects successful? So even if I'm hired to do something very specific, what can I do to ultimately bring about what everyone's looking for in a way where the cash keeps coming. So I'll give an example of that, which is just to say that not long ago, I was working with a nonprofit in a part of the country that deals with tremendous challenges like homelessness, addiction, even human trafficking. And their goal is to help minister to people who find themselves in these situations. And so it takes tens of millions of dollars to do that in the part of the country that they're in. And about half of that money they're able to raise through thrift stores that they own. But the other half come from donations that people typically make in response to their email newsletter. And after a period of time, they'd been in business for many years or been in ministry for many years, and they noticed some stagnation and then even some decline when it came to these donations. And they weren't entirely sure what to do about that. So they were bringing in different people to try to fix it. Their suspicion was that maybe their content had gotten stale. People were tired of hearing the same old thing. Maybe they needed a new, fresh content strategy. But that didn't seem to be fixing whatever was broken. So finally, they brought me in. And the first thing I did was what I recommend in the book. I created a success diagram. And that's where you just list out everything that's going to have to go right in order for you to get the outcome you're looking for. And then beneath each thing that can go right, you write the things that might go wrong. And so I diagrammed everything out. What's it going to take to turn somebody who reads this newsletter into a donor and hopefully, a recurring donor? And what I found was the very first thing that we had to confirm was that people were actually receiving the emails. And that felt like such a given. Why would that not be the case? But I tried to be very thorough. I tried to, again, go outside the scope of necessarily what I'd been hired to do as a consultant. So I went in and looked, and sure enough, there was a technical issue that was preventing people from even receiving the emails, a large percentage of this list. And so the reason that they had experienced this stagnation, this decline, wasn't anything to do with their content, which is what I'd been hired to reinvent. It actually was stemming from a technical issue that was causing their emails to go to spam. So I fixed that. People started receiving the emails again, and it opened the door for the works that they'd already been doing to ultimately finally have an effect again. So that's an example of really, I think, how I got to this place of thinking about our odds of success is recognizing that it's not just about how hard you work. It's not just about how much you want it. It's not just about how much people like you. To some extent, our success as individuals is going to be determined by the success of the projects we're involved in. And so I tried to do what I could to tip the odds in the favor of the people I was working with, trusting that the more successful they were, the more successful I'd be.
I agree with you, and that's I've been writing while you're talking because one of the questions I'm a techie nerd. When I don't hear, and I suspect that they might have lost some people if it had gone on too long where they weren't receiving the newsletters or emails, because after a while, people move on. They just think, "Well, you left. I'm not coming back." Did
I
they
think that's
lose
true.
numbers? Yeah.
Well, to some extent, I think they certainly lost some attention and lost some trust. A lot of times when it
Right.
comes to unsubscribes, that's usually in response to an email. We receive something and it reminds us, oh, I've lost interest. So there was some churn when we started communicating with people again because many of them had forgotten who we were. So exactly like you're saying, we reappeared. And after, for some of them being gone for an extended period of time, they had lost some interest or maybe even forgotten that they, at one time did subscribe to this list. So there was some burn off. So I agree with you that consistency is important. And I think your work has been a real testament to the power of consistency and the way that you've run this show for so many years.
Thank you. I never knew what was going to happen with this thing, and I'm so proud of it. I have to say it's 18 years old, and honestly, and I say this all the time, it's not me, it's my guests,
Mm.
100%. I'm just here to listen. Shut up and get out of the way. That's my job.
Your show is old enough to vote
I know, or drive or drink. I won't
or
let it
drive or
vote.
drink. My
Yeah.
goodness, hopefully your show will make good decisions.
Yeah, no, probably. I'm not gonna let it vote. What happened that made you start thinking about success as something that you could actually calculate? And by the way, I just wrote down, when success diagram, as soon as we're done today, I'm going straight to Claude, and
Mm.
I'm going to have him diagram that for me.
Very good. And I have a template online that you can also use if you want. It'll just kind of you can fill in the gaps, and so that's
Okay.
hopefully Claude will give you a great output. I've never asked Claude to success diagram something for me, so maybe it'll do a very good job. I hope it does. I'll be interested to hear the results of your experiment.
I'll
But in ter
start with yours, and then I'll take it over to Claude and see what
Very
happens.
cool. That's exciting. I like that application. So let me answer your question, which is just to say, what was it that gave me this interest in trying to change my odds of success? And I think there's two stories, and they're both true, but sometimes life's a little bit complicated. One is I think this is how I've thought for years. I just didn't necessarily have the mathematical basis for it. So in the book, I tell the story of how I got my first job out of college. I was not really inspired by the different entry level positions I was seeing. And so I did something really audacious. I applied to be the product development director at a growing health organization. And if I were to get that job, I was going to be managing people in their 50s, 60s, 70s. This was a long time ago. I was 21 years old. And so I was going to be just kind of this kid fresh out of college, managing people, some of whom had PhDs, some of whom had master's degrees. And so I was given an interview, and that was cool. And that meant that at that point, the only thing I needed was an offer. So there was only one step left. And so in my head, I was asking the question, what are the potential bad outcomes that could happen instead of what I want? Because that's the foundation of my approach is we identify the things that could happen instead of what we want. We try to make those less likely. And in doing so, it makes the outcome we do want more likely. If we think about flipping a coin, it could land on heads or tails. If we want it to land on heads, that means we have a 50% chance of winning and a 50% chance of losing. Why do we have a 50% chance of losing? Because it might land on tails. And in life, if we can make landing on tails, so to speak, less likely to happen, we can bring those odds over to our side. So I identified three threats to me getting this great job. One of them was that they might not hire me because of how young I looked. I might walk in, they'd take one look at me, and now it wasn't an email anymore, and they'd say, oh my goodness, he's a kid, he can't manage this team. So I used my creativity to try to take some risk out of that bad outcome, and it was very simple. I just grew a beard. It made me look a few years older. It didn't. I wasn't going to lie about my age, but it at least took a little bit of the edge off. That when I first walk into the room, you didn't take one look at me and say, "Oh my goodness, look how young he is."
Yeah, he can't. He's not even old enough to shave. So,
That's right. Not even old enough to shave. That's right. Yeah.
got it.
The second risk that I identified was, they might be concerned about my lack of experience, and that was a valid concern. Were they to have it because I didn't have a lot of experience, and I wasn't going to lie and say that I did. But I had the opportunity to try to redirect the conversation into my strengths. And so I actually took the time to sit down and write up a plan for how I was going to turn this department around in this organization. And it was so thick, I had to have it spiral bound. It was a book. And I took it in with me, a bunch of copies, and I gave it to every person I met with. And I showed up with that plan. And when they would ask questions about my past experience, I would redirect the conversation to be about my plan for the future. So I never lied to anybody, but rather than spending a lot of time dwelling on the fact that I was fresh out of college, we spent more time dwelling on the fact that I was the one who showed up with a plan and that had a really positive impact. The third and final risk I identified was they might just be concerned that I couldn't fit in with the existing team members. I was maybe too young. There's this generational gap. They might think he's just not going to be able to get along with the group. So I used a strategy that I'm still using today, Denise, in many ways that resembles some of what you've done with this show. But I asked them, is there any books that you've read as a team lately? And they told me three titles. I went and read all of them. And what that allowed me to do was I could then make inside jokes. I could understand their jargon. I understood the frameworks that they were using. And so I was able to fit in sort of like an existing team member myself. And I remember being in a group interview at one point. It was me and several candidates who were significantly older, significantly more qualified by some standards than I was. And I knew that one of the books that this team had read was called The Wuffy Factor. And not a lot of people are currently talking about The Wuffy Factor to my knowledge, but it was a book about how brands can earn social capital. And we're sitting in this meeting and somebody suggested an idea. And I said, I think that's the kind of idea that could earn us a lot of Wuffy. And I remember looking around at these other candidates who had no idea what I was talking about, made a face. I mean, their eyes were bugging out of their heads. What on earth did he just say? Did he slip up? Is this some slang term I've never heard before? They all seemed kind of worried for me. And then I looked at the existing team members, and they were all nodding along, smiling, laughing. They knew exactly what I was talking about because we were reading the same books. And so reading those titles, again, allowed me to fit in like an existing team member. So when it was all said and done, I got that job. I became the product development director at a health organization. I was 21 years old. I was managing people in their 50s, 60s, 70s. And that was the thing that really dramatically accelerated my career. I skipped so many entry-level positions because of what I did to change my odds of success when it came to that goal. So you asked, how did I step into this way of thinking? In some ways, I've had it for a long time. What ultimately came later in my career was an understanding of sort of the mathematical basis for it, recognizing that it wasn't just something that worked for me, it was something that made a lot of sense mathematically and strategically, and that we could potentially apply to a wide range of goals. So again, when I am working with somebody who wants to accomplish something, I encourage them to create what's called a success diagram. Let's say that you're trying to run a marathon. Let's say that's a goal you have. I recently ran my first half marathon. I don't know if I have a marathon in me, but let's say that you're trying to accomplish that. So you hire a running coach, and she says, okay, I can get you ready in time for this race, but there's 3 things that you're going to have to do. I need you to eat, sleep, and train according to the parameters that I'm going to give you. And if you stick with those 3 regimens, you'll be ready on race day. But if you cheat on any of those 3, if you don't eat the way you're supposed to, if you don't sleep the way you're supposed to, if you don't train the way you're supposed to, then you're not going to be ready in time. You're not going to be able to complete such a challenging thing. So if I were going to create a success diagram for that, I would write, starting at the left, I need to eat the way I'm supposed to, then move a little bit over to the right. I need to sleep the way I'm supposed to, I need to train the way I'm supposed to, and at the far right, I would put the goal, which is successfully complete a marathon on the date that I'm planning to run it. So in this goal, there's 3 things that have to go right. And I then encourage people to, well, first of all, identify the things that could go wrong for each of those and write them beneath it. But I also invite people to then estimate how likely they think they are to accomplish each of the prerequisite steps in their goal. And that is something that researchers have found gives us the opportunity to be more accurate. When you ask someone, what are your odds of running a marathon? They'll give you their answer. I don't know, maybe 50-50 that I could finish it or not. And then you break it down and say, well, what do you think your odds are at these individual prerequisites? So just to demonstrate it, let's be really simple. And let's just say we think it's 70% across the board. We think there's a 70% chance we'll eat the way we're supposed to, a 70% chance we'll sleep the way we're supposed to, and a 70% chance we'll train the way we're supposed to. This is where a lot of people fall into a thinking trap, and the trap is called averaging. And if we feel good about the individual steps on the path to a goal, we feel good about our odds of accomplishing the goal. And that seems to make sense. If each of the steps seem likely to happen, our goal is likely to happen, right? But in reality, that's actually not true. It's very counterintuitive. We can't average those numbers. We have to multiply them because we need all 3 of those things to go right, or else we're going to fail. And if we multiply those numbers together, 0.7 times 0.7 times 0.7, we find that we actually only have a 34% chance of being ready on race day. We are probably not going to successfully run this marathon, even though we maybe felt really good about the goal. And so it was later in my career that I uncovered sort of the mathematical basis for this, and in doing so recognized just how diligent we need to be in optimizing our odds of success, because this is a relatively simple goal, running this marathon. Only 3 things need to go right. We think there's a 70% chance each of them will go right, but there's only a 34% chance we'll accomplish this goal. So we have to be looking at what can we do to improve our odds of success. And it's, just that story that I told a minute ago. It's identifying what are the outcomes that could happen instead of what we want. How could the coin land on tails, so to speak? And what can we do to take that risk off the table? Because as the odds of these bad outcomes get smaller, the odds of the good outcomes get better. And if we do that in the context of a single goal, we can change our predicted outcome. But if we do it in the context of several goals, we can change our lives, maybe even our legacies.
And I was going to ask you, and you already told me, so I knew that I didn't have to do too much talking here, but estimating your odds of success. And I suspect, and I know I do it, I constantly underestimate or I overestimate because I'm not being rational. I'm like, oh, yeah, I can do that. We do it all the time with, time management. Oh, that'll take me an hour. 3 days later, you're cursing and drinking coffee. I don't drink coffee. But, we need to get a lot better about under and overestimating what our time actually looks like.
Yeah, and I think the same principle applies, which is, maybe you're asking the question, how long will it take me to complete this project? Well, you have an estimate, but break it down into the actual steps required to complete the project, and then try to assess how long it's going to take you to complete each step and write it back up together. And a lot of times you'll find that some of that optimism went away. You've kind of hit the goal with a hammer, you've broken it apart, and when you're looking at the individual components, a lot of times that's kind of a gut check, a reality check that helps us, better assess what the cost is actually going to be. And I don't say that in any way to discourage people. First of all, I say all of this to help people. I think that one of the reasons that we experience so much failure in our world is people don't understand their odds of success. I think that's one of the reasons why most people fail at their New Year's resolutions. I think that's one of the reasons why, so many mergers and acquisitions fail to create lasting shareholder value, why so many new businesses ultimately fail to make it past 5 years, is there's not typically an understanding of all of the things that are going to have to go right and then not typically an understanding of the fact that you can't average that there's actually, a multiplying that has to happen to understand our odds of success. So I think we do need to break things down into these smaller components for the gut check. But then the point isn't to give into discouragement. The point is to do the work of probability hacking. And that's where we identify the things that could go wrong and then use our creativity to try to find solutions to those problems. And that's not a scary thing. That's not a discouraging thing. It's a really fun thing. It can be a very collaborative thing. In the context of the marathon example, we need to train a certain way for 90 days. That's one of our 3 prerequisites. Well, what are some things that could happen instead of that? Is it possible that inclement weather could derail our training regimen? Sure. How can we use our creativity to work around that? Maybe we need a treadmill in our house for a period of time. Maybe we need some exercises like climbing the stairs or some kind of body weight exercise that we can do if the weather prevents us from going out and running. Maybe one of the reasons we would fail in that training regimen is our schedule would just get out of control. What can we do about that? Well, maybe we need to train first thing in the morning before, unexpected to-dos or unexpected challenges have the opportunity to kind of compromise our calendars. Maybe we are concerned that a lack of motivation is the thing that's going to take us out. Maybe we need a running partner. Maybe we need some accountability, somebody who can help us keep going after kind of the early excitement of the goal wears off. Maybe we're concerned about injury. That could certainly be an issue. Maybe we need to go to a physical therapist and say, I'm going to be training for a marathon. What kind of stretches and rehabbing should I do to reduce my risk of getting injured? So when we start to recognize that our odds of success aren't just some mystical thing, but they're ultimately what's left over after the odds of the bad outcomes, we see that we have an opportunity to use our creativity, use some intentionality to take the risk out of our goals. And when we do that, we can get more of what we want.
And I was listening to you very carefully, and I wrote down one word: discouragement.
Mm.
We all do it to ourselves. We're like, oh, I don't even know where to go with this. The weather's bad, or I don't have grocery money, or my cat died. Something happened. It just, shook me to my core. Now what? But I think so many of us don't say now what. We just go, oh, crud, and then go do something different.
I think that's true. And one of the things I encourage people with is the idea that you don't necessarily have to quit a goal. Sometimes it's better to just pause a goal. If the odds don't look realistic right now, don't say, I'm never going to accomplish that. Say, I'm going to focus on some other things right now, because a lot of times success begets success. It changes our odds at other things that maybe we've always wanted to accomplish. In my life, a smaller goal that I accomplished was writing for the Harvard Business Review. That was something that felt reasonably attainable for me at the time. So I really focused on that, and I was successful at it. And that changed my odds at so many other goals. Writing for the Harvard Business Review opened up new consulting opportunities for me. It made it easier for me to get a book deal. It helped me land speaking gigs. It was something that demonstrated my credibility and my authority in the space to the world. And so that's an example of how a smaller goal can change our odds at bigger goals. So in the case of writing this book, that's something I'd wanted to do for a very long time. It wasn't realistic at the time. So I didn't quit it. I paused it. And by pausing it, I was able to bring it back later. We also have this tendency when something goes wrong, we try to run from failure. And I tell people not to do that, because even in pursuit of failure, we've typically made a lot of accomplishments. Even in pursuit of failure, we've typically developed an impressive list of assets and to some extent of insights. And that puts us in a position where we have this wealth of accomplishment, this wealth of information that we can put toward a new ending. But if we run away from the failure, then we're going to forget all of the work that we've done and all that's come out of it. So I tell the story of a group of friends who were trying to start a dating website in the early 2000s. And the way that they were differentiating themselves was they had built a tool that allowed people to upload a video of themselves to the internet to introduce themselves and say, this is a little bit about me. These are the kind of people I'm interested in. And they could ultimately try to match up with other people and go on dates. And at the time that they were doing this, that was revolutionary technology to be able to easily upload a video to the internet. Now we can do it in our sleep, but that was not something that people could easily do at the time. And they struggled to get this dating website off the ground. People were a little bit skeptical of, sharing something so vulnerable on the internet. That's obviously changed. And there was some hesitation. And so they just couldn't get enough people to create videos to go on a date. And so they eventually had to give up on this goal of starting this dating website. But they didn't run from the failure. They instead stopped and said, what have we accomplished in pursuit of this goal? And their biggest accomplishment was creating the technology that gave people the ability to easily upload a video to the internet. So they changed the rules of their website and changed the branding and said, we're going to let people upload any video they want, within some restrictions. But it doesn't have to be about going on dates. It could be about, seeing an elephant at the zoo. And that website ultimately became YouTube. They sold
YouTube.
it
I
for
knew you were going to
1.5.
say that.
Yeah, they sold it for $1.5 billion. Is I believe the rumored number. Don't quote me on that. But it was an incredible success that was born out of a failure. But what allowed that failure to become a success was they didn't run from it. They paused and said, what are some of the assets we've accumulated in pursuit of that goal that failed? And what other goal could we use those toward? And I think that's really important when we talk about that word discouragement.
It is. And here's a question I've been wanting to ask you because I think it's going to surprise a lot of our listeners. It surprised me. You actually encourage people to think negative.
I
And
do.
I know. And we live in a world that is absolutely saturated with positive thinking, vision boards, and manifest your dreams messaging. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm not entirely certain that it's all that workable. I think it's a lot of positive thinking, and there's nothing wrong with positive thinking either. I do a lot of that. But when I heard this, I thought, now this is going to be a conversation. So tell us what you mean by thinking negative, why it's actually a good thing, and why it works when all of that positive thinking sometimes just doesn't.
Well, I do believe that we have an opportunity and to some extent even an obligation to think positively, but that means something different for me than it does for most of the people who say it. When people are pursuing a big goal, they're typically given the advice to think positive, and what that means is don't worry about what could go wrong. If it's meant to happen, it'll happen. Don't even think about, the things that might get in your way. That'll just discourage you. And so we have some people who are pursuing goals with terrible odds of success, and they have a lot of positivity toward the goal, but in reality, they're most likely going to fail. I encourage people to think negative because that's a part of the probability hacking framework. Ask the question, what are the things that could ultimately happen instead of what I want? What are the things that could derail my marathon training regimen? In some ways that's negativity, but when we identify those things, it's not the end of the story. It then creates the opportunity for us to try to use our creativity. I wasn't intending to use all these ivity worms, or words, excuse me, but it creates the opportunity for us to then try to change our odds of success by taking some of the risk out of that goal. So we then have the opportunity over a period of time to try to take as much risk out as we can. We can collaborate with other people. And then at the end of it, we have a goal that we hopefully feel good about. So there's that positivity again. We got there, but we also have elevated odds of success. And to the people who are maybe skeptical of that, my answer would be, tell me how positive thinking is going to take away the risk of inclement weather derailing your training. Tell me how really wanting to be successful is going to stop something from swamping your schedule. Tell me how, a commitment is going to prevent an injury. I just don't see the connection between those things. I do think there are creative solutions, like in the case of an injury, going to a physical therapist and learning about, some stretching, some rehabbing you can do to prevent injury while you're training for a marathon. So I'll buy that. I'm not going to buy the idea that, positive thinking is going to prevent that. So I want people to feel positive in pursuit of their goals, but I want them to have substantiation for that. I want there to be a reason they feel positive, and I want it to be that they've taken the time to understand the risks, taken as much risk off the table as they could, and we're left with, a goal where they feel good about their odds.
Mm. And see, that makes perfect sense to me. And it's way too easy, especially if you're overwhelmed or you've like, I've got this. It's great. Everybody's going to love it until they don't. Because you didn't do your homework, your true homework, which was meant that you understood where you're going, what the offer is, what you want people to take away from it, how you can help them, and back to what can go wrong here. How do I fix that? How do I maneuver around that?
I think deep down, a lot of people sense and fear that their odds of success are probably bad on big goals. What I think they don't know is that they have the power to change their odds. And so, not knowing they can change it, they try to avoid it. They try to not think about it. They try to distract themselves from it. But when you know that you can change it, you can confidently lean in and sit a little bit in that discomfort of acknowledging that there's things that could happen that aren't what you want to happen, but that you have the power to do something about that.
I agree. I'm on page 54. How to easy hack your goals.
Hmm.
Let's talk about that because and you're talking about probability hacking, and that's a term I had not heard before, to be honest. And I knew it when I read it. I went, well, I know what that is. Do I practice it? Not really. So guess what I'm doing now? But let's talk about that. How is it easy to hack your goals?
Well, I call it easy hacking because I give a version of that framework that involves a fair amount of numbers. It's designed to help you create a prediction of how likely you are to succeed. And the easy hack is an example where there are no numbers. And so I've given a couple examples of that here during this interview, which is, the marathon example and my job interview example. It's create a success diagram, identify what you want, what's the ultimate goal you're pursuing, write down each thing that has to go right in order for you to get that outcome. And then for each one of those prerequisites, what are the things that could go wrong? In the book, I call those potential bad outcomes or PBOs. And ultimately, if we can make their risk smaller, we can improve our odds at getting what we're looking for. And I believe that it can be fun. I believe it also can be very collaborative. I have a little bit of a controversial take. People hear this and say, "Oh my goodness, he's so full of himself." But I think if you give me the chance to defend my position, I think you'll come around to my side. Maybe that's more of the hubris. We'll see. But I'm not a big fan of asking for advice, at least in the traditional context. And I know that sounds like a crazy thing to say. Shouldn't we always ask for advice? But I'll tell you a story that really clarified this for me, or I guess was one of the moments that kind of tipped my thinking. And I was in the process of considering whether I was going to take on a new consulting client who would have paid a lot of money, big contract. But this person was also notoriously difficult, and it was going to be a really stressful engagement. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that or not. So I went to some different peers, colleagues, friends, mentors, and I asked them, would you take this contract, take the money, or would you avoid it because you don't want to deal with the stress? And I was frustrated because I got a very mixed response. About half of the people said take the money, and about half of the people said, why on earth would you want that stress in your life? And at first I thought the advice was kind of useless. It was just I was wondering, what do I do with this? But then I noticed a trend. And the trend was that among the people who said you should definitely take the money, almost all of them had less money than I did. And among the people who said you should avoid the stress, almost all of them had significantly more money than I did. And what that taught me was that when people give us advice, typically they're not giving us advice really in our context. They're giving us advice in their own context. They're telling us what they would do with their circumstances, with their advantages, with their disadvantages, and crucially, with their goals. It's really a reflection of what they want from their lives, not necessarily an attempt to understand what we want from our lives. And for that reason, I think that a lot of advice is not necessarily as helpful as it could be. You say, what do you think I should do? And then they tell you what they would do, but they're making that decision from a very different context than yours. And what I love about a success diagram and doing an easy hack like this where there aren't any numbers is when you graph out, here's everything that has to go right for me to get what I want. Here's the things I've identified that can go wrong. Now you can have a conversation in a shared context. Now you can say things like, are there any risks that you can think of that I haven't identified in this diagram? Are there any solutions you can think of that might take some of these risks off the table? Is there a more streamlined path to the goal I want? Maybe I'm doing this in a way that's too roundabout. Maybe I'm trying to accomplish things that, sure, it'll work, but there's a better way to do it. Now we can have a conversation where everybody's on the same page. And then I think asking for advice or at least collaboration in the thinking process can be incredibly valuable because we're all chasing after the same thing. So I think easy hacks are a big opportunity for getting team alignment, getting departmental alignment. I use them in leadership, but I also, of course, use them as an individual too.
And I have to tell the audience this question that we're talking, it's question number 3, and it's called, why doesn't asking for advice play a bigger role in this framework? And that is on page 135, I think. Yeah. You know why I know? Because I sticky noted that
You've
page.
got the sticky notes.
I do.
If I ever have a question about the book, I'm going to come to you. You know
Just
it better
call
than I
me.
do.
I got the sticky notes. But, you're saying in here, and this is another sticky note, this is on page 137, ask questions that reveal new options, ask questions that pit your options against each other with your specific goal in mind, ask questions that might reveal gaps in your reasoning. That one I sticky noted twice, because gaps, oh man. Ask questions that challenge your assumptions about the goal that you're pursuing, and it just kind of goes on. So, do you want to delve into some of these?
Yeah, you're talking about my decision-making framework. I try to give
Yeah.
people a way to make smarter decisions in the context of having a success diagram, and it's really easy in many ways because when you have this path toward a goal, you can then play out how different decisions might impact that. So, if I know that these are the things that have to go right for me to get what I want, these are the things that could go wrong, I can now take a decision like, should I hire candidate A or candidate B and put it through the diagram? If I hire candidate A, what risks get smaller? What risks get bigger? Same for candidate B. And so at the end, I kind of have these two hypothetical futures, and I can choose the one that I would rather have, recognizing that it may not go the way that I want, but I've made my best estimates. And so I find it to be really helpful. But a lot of the questions are designed to help us identify more ideas, more options that we can consider in pursuit of the goals that we're pursuing. The pursuit of the goals we're pursuing, kind of clumsy, but you know what I mean. And the reason for that is I think that one of the biggest hindrances to our decision-making ability, and research backs this up, is we don't spend enough time thinking through our options. We just get a couple of options, and then we agonize over which one of those to choose. And so we're asking, should I choose option A or option B? Option A or option B? And we ask for advice, and we think about it, and we do all these things trying to decide if it's A or B. Eventually, we go with A. It doesn't work out. Oh, I knew I should have chosen B. But in many cases, B was just as bad as A. That's what made it such a difficult decision in the first place. The best option might have been option G or option Y or option Z. We didn't brainstorm that long. We didn't take enough time to recognize that there were other ideas. And so one of the first things we have to do to improve the quality of our decisions is spend some real time. And this isn't something that's going to happen normally in a single session. We need some time to marinate on it. Make a list of everything we can do, and then keep that list around and keep adding to it over a period of a few days. And then at the end, start looking through your options. And there's this pushback against that idea. People talk about like decision overwhelm. You're going to have too many options. It's going to paralyze you. I think that there is some truth in that, but I don't think it's true when you have a clear standard to measure against. In the book, I tell the story of Thomas Edison. He's trying to invent the incandescent lamp, and he's kind of in a race to get these valuable patents. There's other people trying to do the same thing. And it all comes down to who can discover a filament that can get hot enough to glow or incandesce without catching on fire and without snuffing out so quickly that it isn't worth, the money to try to install these things in your home. So he's trying to find this practical filament. It's him against all these other people. What did he do that allowed him to win? It was really simple. It was really unnuanced. It was really inglorious. He experimented with 6,000 different materials to find an ideal winner. And he ultimately discovered that carbonized bamboo was the best of all the options that he had considered. And, if you're just trying to brainstorm filament for an incandescent lamp, I probably wouldn't have started with carbonized bamboo. And that shows that a lot of times it's in these later ideas that a lot of times we find the breakthroughs, especially as we combine different ideas. Maybe bamboo was an idea. Maybe carbonizing different materials was an idea. What if we carbonize the bamboo? Eventually, we have these combinations and permutations that help us discover better outcomes or better options, excuse me. But it wasn't hard to make that decision, even with 6,000 things to choose from. Which one did you choose? You chose the one that burned the longest without catching on fire or snuffing out. Easy enough. And I think when we have a success diagram, it allows us to tap into some of those same things because we can keep putting things through the diagram. If we're trying to choose between 10 candidates, great. We know what has to go right. We know what could go wrong. How do each of those 10 people impact this hypothetical future we've diagrammed out for ourselves? And when we're done with that, I think we can put ourselves in a position where it's not that hard to really winnow down our options and ultimately make a decision. So I think that's a big part of how decision making gets easier when you've taken the time to diagram out what you're going to need to see in order to get what you want.
You're talking about overwhelming with your list, and I have done that many times, but I have also found that what I thought was a brilliant idea 5 years ago but didn't act on, turned out it wasn't a brilliant idea, and I'm glad I didn't touch it.
Sure. I think that can totally happen. I've had that. I've had the reverse. I've had some experiences where 5 years later, I wish I'd done something with that idea because somebody else beat me to it.
Right. And you do have to keep track of things, and I think that's maybe what we're always in a hurry. We're keyboard warriors, and we're typing, and I don't know about you, but when something really sparks my interest, I have to write it down, physically write it down. I've got composition notebooks everywhere. I buy them for 50 cents at the Dollar Tree. Well, it used to be 50 cents, but if I physically write it, I'm going to remember it far better than if I just type myself a quick email or put it in Notion, or it's just going to stick with me longer. And I know this. So once I'm back through some of these notes, I'm like, oh, okay, that's never going to happen. And I know because I felt it. What you just said, we do feel it. We know at some level it's just not for us or not going to work. And others were like, I need to do this. I need to pursue this now. So I'm thinking, and you're not saying it, but what I'm thinking is sometimes you just have to go with your instincts.
Yeah, I think we struggle to analyze our odds of success in a vacuum, but I think we're typically a lot better at it when we give ourselves the ability to compare and contrast. And so what I encourage people to do, and this isn't in the book, so this is, it's a good thing that people are listening to this because this is an insight that in some ways came later, or at least was formalized later. If you're thinking about a long list of goals to pursue, like you're describing, you have a bunch of different ambitions and you're trying to decide which one should I pursue first, I encourage people to, get them all on a sheet of paper and then reorder the list from what you think is the most likely to succeed to the least likely to succeed. We may not know for sure what our odds are of getting a book published, of starting that business successfully, of, getting a law changed, but we can typically guess, I think, pretty accurately in comparison to other goals. So you reorder your list from most likely to least likely. That's one way to prioritize because we find that a lot of times when we succeed at the smaller goals in our lives, it changes our odds at the bigger goals in our lives. So we could start with something big and unattainable, maybe fail at it, or we could start with one of the ones that's maybe more attainable and then put ourselves in a position to go after those bigger achievements. So I think that you're absolutely right. We do have lots of ideas. It is true that we sometimes have to go with our gut, but I think we can get a little bit more dialed in when it comes to what our gut is telling us when we give it a couple of kind of benchmarks or bookends. Do I think it's more likely than this other goal or less likely than this other goal? And to some extent, if we can ultimately come up with a list based on that, then we can at least do the best within the information we have to try to make a good decision.
Exactly. And once your instinct or your gut, whatever you want to call it, and I do trust my gut a lot of the time, but I need more information. Say, oh, that's a good idea, Denise. Well, maybe, but how are you going to prove this to yourself? Or at least keep your interest in pursuing it alive?
Sure. Yeah, motivation. That's a big
Yeah.
part of this, isn't it? And I actually encourage people to make that one of the filters they're using when they are prioritizing what goal to pursue. Just like we've made a list of, what's most likely to succeed from least likely to succeed, then we need to sort of ask ourselves the question, and which one of these am I most motivated with? Because quitting is a big threat to our success. If you have a goal where your odds are good, then quitting could very well be the biggest threat to your success because if it just plays out, we expect it to go well. Now it's just a question of what if you quit along the way. And so there's a couple of ways that we can approach that. One is, again, we can certainly prioritize goals that we have the most motivation for. Not necessarily a feeling, but something that aligns with our values. For example, my daughter was born deaf. She has cochlear implants. I have certain goals that pertain to, helping people with cochlear implants be able to experience certain things, be able to grow and thrive in certain ways. And that's a goal, or those are some goals where I have a deep, deep well of motivation. Very unlikely that my motivation to accomplish those is going to dry up in a few days because I'm trying to make life better for this beautiful little girl who, I love so much and get to see every single day. You're not going to forget about it. She's there every day. So there are opportunities to try to align our goals with our passions to some extent. But then there is also an opportunity to kind of just treat quitting as a potential bad outcome and use our creativity for what can we do to reduce that risk. Sometimes it's an accountability issue. Sometimes it's, uh, you know, finding ways to create systems where the success of the goal isn't entirely dependent on our motivation on any given day. Sometimes we can automate certain things, outsource certain things, delegate certain things to make sure that we're not a bottleneck in the system. And when we do that, we can, again, minimize the risk of quitting just like we would minimize the risk of any other bad outcome.
Exactly. And I think in some ways you were talking about being more resilient, and I'm on page 159. You've got 6 ways to become more resilient.
Yes.
And I like to be hospitable to yourself for some darn reason. So many people that I meet, myself included in the mirror, are resistant to being kind to ourselves. What the heck is that about?
Well, I think that we've been told a story in a lot of movies that, sort of we kind of have to be a drill sergeant to get the best performance out of ourselves, that a lot of people don't realize, the real limits of their potential. And so they're quitting too soon. And I think there's some truth in that. And I actually make the case in the book that if you're pursuing a short term goal, like if it's, run that marathon and you're already on the track, then you might want to push yourself because you're going to be done, in a matter of hours. But if the goal you're trying to accomplish is, I told the story of Opal Lee getting Juneteenth turned into a federal holiday. It took her decades. If you're pursuing a goal that's going to take decades, you don't want to be too hard on yourself because that's really going to increase your risk of quitting at some point over that long period of time. So I'd say the longer the goal, the more hospitable you need to be to yourself.
And once you figure that out, and it did take me a while, and I'll tell you how I figured this out. I had a business coach, excuse me, hang on. I don't want to cough on you. I had a business coach many years ago, and she was listening to me whine and snivel, things we all do,
Sure,
should
me too.
do. Oh, good. I'm glad I'm not alone. But she was very quiet, and I thought, "Oh, crap, she's going to fire me." I don't blame her. She's going to fire me. I knew my coach was just going to say, "Denise, stop talking. I don't like you." Okay. But she finally said, "Denise," and I went, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "What are you tolerating?"
Mm.
That made me stand up and pay attention. And I
Wow.
ask myself every day, Denise, what are you tolerating? It may be small, but it may have compounded over the years, or it may just be an irritant that I don't want around me. I don't know. But what am I tolerating? I think it's something we need to ask in terms of our persistence, our goals. We need to understand.
Oh, yeah, that examine life. It's so easy to fall into a routine that is based on nothing more than just a reaction to something that happened. And that's, I mentioned that I've been laid off a couple of times in my career, and I hated both of those experiences. But looking back, I have to tell the truth and say that they were both really helpful for me, especially that second one, because what I was tolerating was a life where I was always at risk of losing my income in a phone call. And that was something that I had experienced twice and didn't want to experience again. And so sometimes it's the disruptions in our lives that give us the opportunity to pause. You think about those people who were starting a dating site because that was just the first idea that popped into their head, perhaps. And then in the context of failure, they were able to say, okay, let's be a little bit more strategic about this. What is a model that would have a better chance of succeeding? Well, doesn't it make sense that instead of only going after people who want to go on a date, we try to create a system that, or rather create a platform that anyone can take advantage of? Would that, be something that would be more likely to gain a big user base and ultimately be something that they could later sell for over $1 billion? I think so.
No kidding. I mean, and, I think I read this in the book. I don't remember it, but when you started talking, I knew you were talking about YouTube. I mean, that had to be them. 6 ways to become more resilient. I love these things. Pursue goals in a pack. But number 4, never start a goal on Thursday. Go.
Yeah, there's this research that talks about something called the fresh start effect. And it's basically that one of the ways that we can help ourselves be more persistent and resilient is to draw a line in the sand. And a lot of times it's easier to play that trick if it's a day that feels significant. It's, the first day of the year, New Year's resolutions. Now we still know a lot of people fail at those, but it's the first day of the week, even the first day of the month, whatever the case may be. But the thought is that a lot of times discouragement takes the form of reminding us of past failures. We're worried that we're not going to be able to succeed in the future because we haven't succeeded in the past. And what the fresh start effect allows us to do, and it's silly, but the research says that it can be impactful, is we say, I have quit a lot in the past, but that was the old me. This is a new year. This is a new me. And I'm going to take, a different approach this time. And so I don't, my entire book is not about the fresh start effect. I think that in and of itself is interesting and can be helpful. We're on, like you said, page 162, so we're pretty deep in. When you combine that with probability hacking, I think you're even in a more powerful situation because you can say, you're right, I have quit in the past, but this is a new year, this is a new me, and I have a new system. Now I'm thinking about my odds of success. I have a diagram of what's going to have to go right and what could go wrong. I've done things to take a lot of the risk out. I've given myself, a document that I can share with other people and collaborate in my thinking. So I'm now in a stronger position than I've ever been, and I don't want to quit this time. And so it's a way to kind of leverage that fresh start effect where you have some new tools in your toolbox as well. And again, that never start a goal on a Thursday is just a joke to say that there is some research that suggests that when we start a goal on a day that feels fresh, we're more likely to stick with it. And they attribute that to the idea that we're able to play this game and say, that was the old me. I'm not like that anymore.
And see, I have deliberately scheduled myself to have Thursday as what I call a quiet day. Then I amended that to potentially a quiet day. I don't have podcasts. I'm trying not to do any heavy duty work. This is the time where I can make phone calls, connect with people that I've been meaning to connect with. Does it always work out that way? No, but for the most part, I'm able to say Thursday's my quiet day. Let's have a conversation. Let's chat. And it works because I just decided Thursday was my day.
I like it. Great to have those rhythms in our lives. Just like we're saying, the examined life a lot of times can be the product of that kind of intentionality when we build a rhythm in that says, all right, it's Thursday, slow down, pause. You don't have to be laid off to re-examine your life. In fact, I'd encourage you to not make that what it takes for you to have a moment of reflection.
I agree. And I think you figured out that this chapter, 6 ways to become more resilient. This is my favorite part of the book. Pursue goals in a pack. And you say in one of my favorite scenes from Charlie Brown, who doesn't know Charlie Brown? Lucy explains to Sally that mountain climbers chain themselves together so if one of them falls, they all fall. which seems kind of rude,
I say in
but
the book that that gets a laugh from me every time, and
you
I
too.
think and I'm living that out because that's always one of my favorite things, and she says, "Mountain climbers that's why mountain climbers chain themselves together, so if one falls, they all fall." And it's great because the truth is exactly the opposite. Mountain climbers chain themselves together, so if one falls, the other can
This can
catch that
catch
person.
him.
Yeah, they can catch that person. It's not so if one falls, they all falls. And
Right.
so, this recognizes the reality of discouragement that we all have good days, we all have bad days. People who are married have maybe experienced this with their spouse. Sometimes they're having a good day and they're in a great mood and their spouse is in a terrible mood, or the reverse. Maybe they're in a terrible mood and their spouse is in a good mood, and the cheeriness can even be kind of annoying. A lot of times we're not synced up when it comes to how we're feeling, and we can use that to our advantage in the context of a goal. If we have a few people pursuing it together, there's a good chance that at least one of them is going to be in a good mood. At least one of them is going to have some optimism that day, and they can, maybe spread that hope a little bit. Other people can borrow from it, and it can get them through those difficult times.
It does help to collaborate, and it took me the longest kind of time to figure that out because I am a highly committed introvert, and I need to be quiet 98% of the time, seriously. But as I got older and I learned what I was tolerating, and a lot of what I was tolerating was me being the bottleneck, to borrow your word, I started saying, "Huh, I can't do this on my own." I don't use the word can't. I won't do this on my own. I need input, whatever that input's going to look like. I need to be somebody that could come to me and ask for help. I need collaboration. I need friends. I need conversations. That changed how I operate a lot.
I can imagine that it would. I'm proud of my book, but I think maybe the best insight to come out of this is that "what are you tolerating?" question. We need to give a shout out to your former business coach because that's pretty impressive.
I was shocked. I mean, and I was actually getting ready to go on a 10-hour trip from where I live in Southwest Louisiana to Atlanta, Georgia, and that's 10 hours.
Really? I wouldn't think it'd be that long. That's interesting.
Oh, well, it's because of the traffic, and then you hit
Mm.
Peachtree, and it's like, "We're never getting out of here." It's like Texas. You don't know if you're ever gonna get out. But at some point, I was telling my best friend, she was driving, we were going to see her sister, and, we were just it was a vacation. And I told her that, and she got very quiet. She said, "Well, what are you tolerating?" And I thought about it, and then I turned it back to her and said, "What are you tolerating?" That was about a 4-hour conversation for both of us. It was very enlightening.
I'm sure it was. My pause is just me thinking about it on my own. I need to save those thoughts for after the interview, but it's certainly thought provoking.
It was, and it's still, I mean, I learned things about her, she learned things about herself, so did I. I learned things about myself that I hadn't actually thought about or put into any kind of a form. Some of it was just downright embarrassing. Some of it was just like, "Well, Denise, you pig-headed little brat." We did a lot of poking at ourselves, but it had to happen, and it still has to happen every day. And some days I can say, "No, I'm good." And then other days I'm like, "Oh, you're not good. Okay, what are you tolerating? Go fix it, or at least think about it."
Yeah, at least think about it. I like that. And then if you do find that it leads to a new goal in your life, consider creating a success diagram. What are the things that are going to have to go right for you to ultimately change your life in the way that you're trying to change it?
Exactly. And I love this book. I mean, there's nothing about it I don't love, but this one group is, and I really wanted to go into this one. We got past thirsty, but making this is number 5, making quitting its own PBO on your
Mhm.
success diagram. Go deep into that if you would.
Well, again, quitting is a threat to your success, and we have the opportunity to try to reduce the risk of bad outcomes derailing our success. And so I think we can treat quitting as a potential bad outcome. And if you're asking yourself the question, what are the things that I can do to reduce my risk of quitting? That might be very context specific. If you're training for a marathon, it might mean finding a running partner. If you're asking, your department managers to fund a proposal that you have, and you're worried that you might wilt and give up if they push back in the meeting, you can make a plan for how you'll handle that scenario. So I do think that it can be sometimes specific. A lot of times, I guess what I want to bring to this conversation is a lot of times we give very general advice for how to avoid quitting. It's just, here's some tips and tricks. And what I'm trying to say here is I think that a lot of times the strategies that are going to keep us from quitting are going to be hyper relevant to the specific goal that we're pursuing. And so I encourage people to think about them in that context instead of just treating quitting as kind of like an abstract idea. We have some books that are telling us not to quit and some books that are telling us to quit. And in my opinion, some of those are treating that a bit abstractly. I think that it's better to think about quitting in the context of a specific goal.
I agree with you. And while you're talking, I'm actually writing an article in my head about you and about this, about podcasting, because pod fade is a very real issue in that industry. And I've been doing this for a long time. And I know quite a bit about I'm actually, in my in my view anyway, an expert on the industry, but so many people, "Oh, I'm gonna be a podcaster." They're all excited. They just do a lot of things backwards, to be honest. But then 8 let's go 8, I'm gonna say 8 episodes in, they're done. They think they're going to be Joe Rogan, they're going to be able to quit their job. It's just inefficient thinking, and they're gone, and I hate to see that happen because many of them have great they're getting their voice heard. They've got great things to share, but they didn't figure out how it was going to work, what was going to happen, what they need to do. And let me tell y'all something. Podcasting is not easy. So just get that out of your head right now. It's fun and it's rewarding. It's not easy. It's a lot of work. But pod fade is a real thing and I hate to see it. So you're going to show up in one of my articles, just so you know.
I'm flattered. Can't wait.
I wanted to ask you, I've got one, oh, we're about to run out of time. Unfair advantages. Now I'm over at chapter 7. This is a big, big chapter, but for decades, competitive swimwear, you said, design revolved around a single concern, avoiding public nudity.
That's right.
And then everything kind of changed. Now everybody's got their fannies hanging out, boy or girl.
Well, it was interesting. It did that for a while. There was a period of time where people thought that the less fabric they had on, the faster they would swim, and that was true at the time because they were swimming in things like cotton that would just hold enormous amounts of water, and so they were basically just trying to not drown in the pool. Over time, we developed some of these synthetic materials that actually reduced friction in the water compared to human skin, and so then the trend reversed, and people were trying to wear nearly full body swimsuits with the goal of reducing drag and swimming faster.
I don't get fashion. I really don't. I look at things that, back in the day, let's go back to the Victorian days, some of the clothing was gorgeous. It looked like it would kill them, but it was beautiful. And now we're wearing big old rayon sacks. I don't quite get that either, but that's a whole nother conversation. What do you want? Or we are running out of time, and I would love for you to come back another time if you
I'd be
would.
honored.
Oh, good. Listen, what do you want people to know about you? What do you want them? Because this has been such a valuable conversation. If you could leave our audience with one final thought, maybe something that didn't come up in our conversation today or something you really want people to walk away from, what would that be?
Well, I'll try to put a bow on this idea of kind of competitive goals and recognizing that I think many of the goals in our lives are not competitive. There's room for lots of different people to succeed. Maybe your goal is to publish a book or run a marathon. You don't necessarily need to worry about other people who are trying to accomplish that too. If anything, you might be able to team up with them and collaborate with them. But there are going to be times in your life where you're pursuing a goal where only one person's going to get it. Only one person's going to win the gold medal. Only one person's going to get that promotion. And so I encourage people to recognize that this success diagram concept isn't just something you can use to understand your own odds. It's also something you can use to understand other people's odds. You can make a diagram for what is my competitor going to need to go right in order for them to get what they want. And that can or create opportunities for you to notice things you can do to try to improve your own odds of success. If you're somebody who sells a product or a service, I really encourage. I just had somebody reach out to me on LinkedIn who'd listened to another interview I did, and I gave them the advice to they're in an industry that they feel like is maybe changing with new technology. They're not sure how to kind of stabilize their income. And I said, make a success diagram for your customer. Write down everything that has to go right for them to get the outcome they're looking for as it relates to their goal. And they're currently, this company that reached out to me, they're helping at one step in the process. But the diagram helped them recognize that there are other steps in the process where they can maybe participate in helping these people be successful, and in doing so, diversify their income a little bit, reduce the risk of these new technologies, potentially sabotaging their business. So every goal that you're pursuing has two hidden numbers attached to it. There's your odds of success, your odds of failure. That's true for your customers. That's true for your competitors. And a lot of times, the way that we can get deeper insight into the odds of success, ours or someone else's, is just try to diagram out everything that has to go right, think about what could go wrong, and then use our creativity to try to tilt the odds in whatever direction we're going. So That's my encouragement to people, is to recognize that your odds can be more deeply understood, they can be changed, and again, over the course of many goals, that can be life-changing, can be legacy redefining, it can be something that gives you a greater sense of agency in your life. This is not a book that denies the realities of uncertainty. This is not a book that tells you that, you have some absolute power over your circumstances. It's instead a book that acknowledges your limitations and then teaches you ways to kind of thwart the system and put yourself back in the driver's seat more often.
Kyle, this has been such a valuable conversation, and I'm so glad you sent me that book. And thank you for sharing your insights and giving us a fresh way to think about achieving meaningful goals. But before we wrap up, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your book? And asking for me, where can I find the diagram?
Sure, you can get the book anywhere. You can go to Amazon's website, Barnes& and Noble, Target, directly on the Penguin Random House website. Any of those places would be an easy place to get it online. If you want to reach out to me, I have a website, but what I've been saying lately is just find me on LinkedIn, Kyle Austin
Mhm.
Young, send me a message. That's been a lot of fun to get to meet people who have been listening to some of these interviews that I've done, so let's just do that. I do have, I think it's successdiagram.com. Let me double check that. Has a template on it that you can use if you want to just start implementing this and you want kind of something you can fill in on your own. Let me double check. Yeah, successdiagram.com. It's not gorgeous, but I had some people request, so I put together a very simple template you can download and fill in on your own. Are you still there, Denise? I can't hear you at the moment.
Sorry, I didn't want to cough on
No,
you.
that's okay.
I don't have a strong voice, and every once in a while it just says, I'm going to take a break.
I
So,
understand.
listen, to our listeners, what I'm taking away from this conversation with Kyle is that, and I think you probably are too, is that success is a lot more intentional than most of us treat it. And we put in the work, we hope for the best. And when it doesn't pan out, we wonder what in the heck went wrong. But Kyle Austin Young has given us a completely different way to look at it, how to understand your odds, be honest about where you are, make adjustments, and then keep on going. It sounds simple, and in a lot of ways it is. But simple is not always easy, and that's exactly why his framework matters. If you want to go deeper, pick up his book, Success is a Numbers Game. It's well worth your time. And then go to successdiagram.com. I'm going there as soon as we finish up here. And thank you for listening today. Until next time, this is Denise Griffitts, your partner in success radio. Kyle, thank you.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Thank you.